The autumn rain fell in sheets outside the windows of Westfield University's science building. Dr. Elena Mercer pulled her cardigan tighter as she walked down the long hallway toward the conference room. Her footsteps echoed against the old tile floor, mixing with the sound of rain hitting the glass. She carried a folder full of papers that represented 3 years of planning and countless grant applications. Today was the day she would finally present her research proposal to the full team. Elena paused at the door, taking a deep breath. She knew some of her colleagues would push back. This kind of research made people uncomfortable, but the potential benefits for forensic science were too great to ignore. She pushed open the door to find 5 people already seated around the oval table. Dr. James Chen looked up from his laptop and gave her a small nod. They had been friends for over a decade, but even he had reservations about this project. "Sorry I'm late," Elena said, setting her folder on the table. The dean wanted to go over the ethics approval one more time. "And?" asked Priya, a young researcher who had joined their forensics department last year. "We have full approval," Elena replied, though he made it clear that everything stays confidential until peer review is complete. The room fell quiet as Elena pulled up her presentation on the screen. The first slide showed the title, Temporal Mapping of Decomposition Processes, the Coffin Project. "I know some of you have concerns," she began, looking at each team member in turn. "But what I'm proposing isn't disrespectful or unethical. We're not using human remains." She clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed image of what looked like a human body but wasn't. "This is the latest generation of synthetic tissue analog," she explained. "It's designed to decompose almost exactly like human tissue. The company that makes it developed it specifically for forensic research like ours." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "My concern isn't just ethical, Elena. It's practical. We're talking about sealing expensive equipment in a coffin with decomposing material. The moisture alone could ruin everything." Elena smiled. This was a question she was prepared for. "That's why we've partnered with the engineering department. They've developed a sealed housing system for the cameras and sensors that can withstand the environment." She moved to the next slide, showing the technical specifications of the camera system. "We'll have 5 different monitoring systems running simultaneously. Thermal imaging to track temperature changes during decomposition, infrared for night vision capabilities, microscopic lenses that can zoom in to capture cellular changes, gas analyzers to measure chemical compounds released, and standard high-definition video to document the overall process." Tom, their resident technology specialist, whistled. "That's some serious equipment. What's the power source?" "Long-term batteries with a wireless charging system built into the bottom of the coffin," Elena replied. "We'll be able to recharge without opening the container and disturbing the experiment." Priya raised her hand. "I understand the scientific value, but why a coffin specifically? Couldn't we use a regular sealed container?" This was the question Elena had been dreading. The coffin aspect was what made many people uncomfortable, but it was crucial to the research. "Good question," she said, taking a sip of water. "Most decomposition studies happen in open-air environments or in basic containers. But many bodies we deal with in forensic cases have been buried in coffins, which create very specific conditions. Temperature, humidity, bacterial growth, they're all different in a coffin environment, and we have almost no good data on how those factors affect decomposition timing." She changed to a slide showing a timeline of the proposed experiment. "We'll monitor continuously for 6 months. The data we collect could revolutionize how we determine time of death in buried remains. It could help solve cold cases where the only evidence is a body that was buried for a long time." The room was quiet as her colleagues considered this. Dr. Chen was the first to break the silence. "I still think we're crossing a line here," he said softly. "Not legally or ethically maybe, but there's something about it that feels wrong." Elena looked at her old friend. "James, I respect your concerns. But think about the families who never get closure because we can't determine when their loved ones died. This research could help them." The rest of the meeting was spent discussing technical details and assigning responsibilities. Despite the initial discomfort, everyone was professionally curious about the potential findings. By the end, even Dr. Chen was asking questions about the camera specifications. As the team filed out, Elena felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This project would either make or break her career. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the underground laboratory they had prepared for the experiment. The space had once been a storage room, but the university had renovated it completely for their needs. No windows, controlled access, and enough space for the coffin and all their monitoring equipment. The coffin itself sat in the center of the room. It was made of solid oak with brass handles, a standard model from a local funeral home. Inside, the synthetic body lay prepared with all the monitoring equipment carefully positioned around it. "Final checks complete," called out Tom, who was going through his technical checklist. "All systems are operational and recording." Dr. Chen stood beside Elena, looking down at their setup. "I still can't believe we're doing this," he said quietly. "Having second thoughts?" Elena asked. He shook his head. "No. Actually, I'm starting to see the value more clearly, but I keep thinking about what people would say if they walked in on this scene." Elena nodded. It did look unsettling. The coffin, the body-like form inside, the array of cameras and sensors positioned to record everything. The LED lights from the equipment cast an eerie blue glow throughout the otherwise dimly lit room. "Everyone ready?" she asked, looking around at the assembled team. Priya gave a thumbs up from her position at the main computer. Tom nodded from where he was making final adjustments to one of the cameras. Dr. Chen simply nodded. "All right then, let's close it up." Together, Elena and Dr. Chen lowered the heavy lid of the coffin. Tom stepped forward with an electric screwdriver to secure. There was the sound of the screws going in seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Seals are holding," Priya reported, watching the readings on her screen. "Internal environment is stable." Elena moved to the main monitoring station where 6 screens displayed different views from inside the coffin. The synthetic body was clearly visible from multiple angles. Everything looked normal, exactly as expected at the beginning of the experiment. "Recording officially started," she announced, checking the timestamp. "Day 1, hour 0 of the coffin project is now underway." The team stayed late that first night, watching the monitors and ensuring everything was working properly. Nothing happened, of course. Decomposition was a slow process. The real data would come in the days and weeks ahead, as they prepared to leave. Setting up the remote monitoring alerts on their phones, Elena found herself standing alone beside the coffin. She placed her hand on the smooth wooden lid. "I know this is just science," she whispered to herself. "But I hope we're ready for what we might learn." She couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would be. Couldn't have imagined that in just a few weeks, what they would see on those monitors would challenge everything they thought they understood about life and death. Couldn't have known that this simple research project would eventually make them all shout, first in shock, then in wonder, at a discovery that would change science forever. But for now, it was just day 1. The cameras were rolling, the data was being collected, and the real story was just beginning to unfold in the darkness inside that ordinary wooden coffin. The first 2 weeks of the experiment passed exactly as expected. The synthetic body began showing the early signs of decomposition, right on schedule. The team fell into a routine, checking the readings each morning, analyzing the data from the previous day, and holding brief meetings to discuss any noteworthy observations. It was, as Dr. Chen had begun to tease Elena, the most boring coffin watching in scientific history. That all changed on the night of the 16th day. The laboratory was quiet at 2 a.m. when Raj Patel, the night shift technician, glanced up from his book to check the monitors. At first, nothing caught his attention. Then he noticed something odd on the thermal imaging screen. A small area near the synthetic body's chest was showing temperature fluctuations that didn't match the rest of the readings. Raj set his book down and rolled his chair closer to the screen. He zoomed in on the area, watching as the temperature rose and fell in a pattern that seemed almost rhythmic. "That's not right," he muttered to himself, reaching for his phone. He had clear instructions to call Dr. Mercer if anything unusual happened, no matter the time. Elena was pulled from a deep sleep by the buzzing of her phone. She fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the bright screen. "Hello?" she answered groggily. "Dr. Mercer, it's Raj. I'm sorry to wake you, but there's something strange happening with the thermal readings. I think you might want to come. And Elena sat up, suddenly wide awake. What kind of strange? There's a pattern to the temperature changes. It's localized to one area, and it's not consistent with normal decomposition processes. It almost looks deliberate. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Elena said, already getting out of bed. The rain had stopped days ago, but the night air was cold and damp as Elena hurried across the empty campus. Her mind raced with possibilities. Equipment malfunction? Some kind of chemical reaction they hadn't anticipated? She couldn't imagine what would cause rhythmic temperature changes in a decomposing synthetic body. Raj was waiting for her when she arrived, his face a mix of confusion and excitement. It's still happening, he said, leading her to the monitoring station. And I've checked all the equipment. Everything's functioning normally. Elena leaned in close to the screen, watching the thermal patterns. Raj was right. There was a definite rhythm to it, almost like a pulse. But that was impossible. Have you called anyone else? She asked. Not yet, I wanted you to see it first. Elena nodded, reaching for her phone. I'm calling Dr. Chen. He needs to see this. James Chen arrived 15 minutes later, his hair uncombed and his jacket thrown on over pajamas. He didn't say a word as he studied the monitors, his expression growing increasingly bewildered. How long has this been happening? He finally asked. I first noticed it about an hour ago, Raj replied, but when I checked the recorded data, there were smaller fluctuations starting about 4 hours earlier. And it's just in this one area? Dr. Chen asked, pointing to the chest region. That's where it's strongest, Elena said. But look. She moved the thermal view to show the whole body. There are smaller fluctuations appearing in other areas now, too. The three of them stood in silence, watching as the patterns spread slowly across the synthetic body. It was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. We need to rule out equipment malfunction completely, Dr. Chen finally said. Raj, can you run a full diagnostic on all the systems? While Raj worked on the diagnostics, Elena and Dr. Chen reviewed the data from the previous days, looking for any early signs they might have missed. They found nothing out of the ordinary until the patterns began that night. The diagnostic is complete, Raj called out. All systems are functioning perfectly. Then what we're seeing is real, Elena said quietly. Dr. Chen shook his head. It doesn't make sense. This synthetic body doesn't have any power source, no electronics. There's nothing that should be generating heat in patterns like this. Unless, Elena began, then stopped herself. Unless what? Unless, Dr. Chen prompted. She hesitated, then said, what if we're not seeing heat generation but energy transfer? Dr. Chen looked at her skeptically. What kind of energy? From where? I don't know, she admitted, but we should call in some help. Morning, the patterns had grown stronger and more complex. Elena called an emergency team meeting, bringing in everyone who was working on the project. As they gathered around the monitoring station, the room buzzed with theories and questions. Could it be bacterial activity? Priya suggested. Some kind of bioluminescent bacteria growing in patterns? Tom shook his head. The thermal imaging isn't picking up light, it's picking up heat. And besides, the patterns are too organized for bacterial growth. What about chemical reactions? Another team member suggested. The synthetic tissue contains various compounds. Could they be reacting in unexpected ways? Dr. Chen pulled up the chemical analysis from the gas sensors inside the coffin. No unusual compounds detected, just the expected gases released during normal decomposition. I think we need outside expertise, Elena said firmly. This goes beyond forensic science now. The team agreed, and by afternoon, Elena had arranged for Dr. Lena Zhao, a physicist specializing in thermodynamics, to consult on the project. Dr. Zhao arrived late that evening, bringing with her additional monitoring equipment. Fascinating, she said after studying the data for an hour. These patterns don't follow any natural thermal distribution I've ever seen. What do you think could cause it? Elena asked. Dr. Zhao adjusted her glasses, still looking at the screens. I'd need to run more tests, but my initial thought is that we're seeing some kind of quantum effect. Quantum? Dr. Chen repeated incredulously. In a decomposing synthetic body? The human body, even a synthetic analog, is ultimately a collection of atoms and molecules, Dr. Zhao explained. And at the quantum level, particles behave in ways that often seem bizarre to us. They can exist in multiple states simultaneously, become entangled across distances, even seem to transfer information instantly. Elena leaned forward, intrigued. Are you suggesting that what we're seeing is some kind of quantum information processing? It's too early to say for certain, Dr. Zhao cautioned, but I'd like to bring in some more specialized equipment tomorrow, if you'll allow it. Of course, Elena agreed quickly. As the days passed, the patterns inside the coffin grew increasingly complex. Dr. Zhao brought in equipment that could detect the most minute energy fluctuations. A small team of quantum physicists joined the project, all bound by strict confidentiality agreements. On the morning of the 23rd day, Elena arrived at the lab to find several of the scientists clustered around the main monitoring station, speaking in excited whispers. What's happening? She asked, setting down her coffee. Dr. Zhao turned to her, eyes wide with excitement. We've been running the data through various pattern recognition programs. Look at this. She pulled up a new display on one of the screens. It showed a complex, swirling pattern of energy within the coffin. Do you see it? Dr. Zhao asked. The mathematical consistency? Elena studied the pattern. It did seem to follow some kind of mathematical principle, though she couldn't identify it. What does it mean? She asked. We're not entirely sure yet, Dr. Zhao admitted. But these aren't random fluctuations. There's a clear structure here, almost like... Like what? Dr. Chen prompted, joining them. Dr. Zhao hesitated, then said, almost like information being processed or transmitted. A heavy silence fell over the group. You're suggesting consciousness? Dr. Chen finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Not consciousness as we understand it, Dr. Zhao clarified quickly. But perhaps some form of quantum information processing that continues after what we would consider death of the organism. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. Their simple decomposition study had stumbled onto something far more profound. We need to document everything meticulously, she said, and we need to prepare for what might happen next. None of them could have predicted what they would witness in the coming days. A discovery that would start with confused whispers and end with astonished shouts as they glimpsed, for the first time in human history, what might lie beyond the threshold of life itself. The university hallways buzzed with whispers. Students noticed the increased security around the basement laboratory. They saw unfamiliar faces, renowned scientists from across the country, hurrying in and out at odd hours. Something big was happening, but no one outside the core research team knew exactly what. Inside the lab, Elena barely registered the time as day 47 began. She hadn't been home in 36 hours. None of them had. Not since the patterns inside the coffin had begun to change dramatically. Coffee. Dr. Chen appeared beside her, offering a steaming cup. Thanks, she said, taking it gratefully. Any changes? He shook his head. Same patterns, still intensifying. Dr. Zhao thinks we might be approaching some kind of threshold. Elena nodded, sipping her coffee as she studied the monitors. The energy patterns now filled the entire space inside the coffin, swirling around the synthetic body in complex formations that none of their algorithms could fully interpret. The original decomposition study had become almost forgotten, a footnote to whatever extraordinary phenomenon they were now witnessing. I keep thinking about what this means, Elena said quietly. If Dr. Zhao is right, if what we're seeing is some form of quantum information processing that continues after physical breakdown, it changes everything. Dr. Chen finished for her. Everything we think we know about life and death. Before Elena could respond, one of the newer scientists, a quantum physicist named Dr. Naveen Patel, called out from his workstation, Everyone, I'm getting some unusual readings on the energy spectrum analysis. The team quickly gathered around his station. The display showed a dramatic spike across several wavelengths simultaneously. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Patel said, his voice filled with excitement and confusion. "It's as if the energy patterns are consolidating, becoming more organized." "Time?" Elena asked sharply. 14 am, someone replied. Dr. Zhao pushed her way through the small crowd to get a better view of the screen. "The mathematical consistency is increasing. Look at these values. They're approaching prime number sequences." "That can't be coincidence," Dr. Chen muttered. Suddenly, all 5 monitoring systems began to chime with alerts. The main screen showed the thermal patterns inside the coffin brightening intensely, forming what looked almost like a web of light surrounding the synthetic body. "My God," whispered Priya from somewhere behind Elena. The patterns were now pulsing in unison, expanding and contracting in perfect synchronization. The team watched in stunned silence as these pulses formed into distinct, repeating shapes. Is it trying to communicate?" Raj asked, breaking the silence. Dr. Zhao adjusted her glasses, her hands visibly trembling. "I think it's possible. These patterns show hallmarks of organized information transfer." "But communicating what? And with whom?" Dr. Chen asked. No one had an answer. They continued to watch as the patterns evolved, becoming increasingly complex. Elena felt a strange mix of scientific curiosity and something close to awe. Whatever they were witnessing, it was unlike anything documented in scientific literature before. "I'm going to call Dr. Sophie Torres," Elena announced suddenly. "She's been doing theoretical work on quantum consciousness for years. If anyone can help us understand this, it's her." Despite the early hour, Dr. Torres answered on the second ring. After a brief explanation, she agreed to come immediately. While they waited, the team worked frantically to record and analyze every aspect of the phenomenon. Dr. Torres arrived just after 5 a.m., a small woman with intense eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a bun. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, moving straight to the monitoring station to examine the data. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. "The patterns began about 3 weeks ago," Elena explained. "But this level of organization and intensity only started a few hours ago." Dr. Torres nodded, her eyes never leaving the screens. "Show me the full data set from the beginning." For the next hour, Dr. Torres reviewed everything they had collected, occasionally asking sharp questions that forced the team to consider angles they hadn't thought of. Finally, she straightened up and turned to face them. "I believe what you're observing is what I've theorized about for years but never had the means to detect," she said. "I call it residual quantum information processing, or RQIP." "What exactly does that mean?" Dr. Chen asked. Dr. Torres chose her words carefully. "The simplest way to explain it is that information, the patterns that make up what we think of as consciousness, doesn't simply disappear when physical systems break down. Instead, it transitions to a quantum state, continuing to process and potentially even evolve." The room was silent as everyone absorbed this. "Are you saying we're watching consciousness survive death?" Priya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not exactly," Dr. Torres clarified. "I'm saying we're watching information survive the breakdown of its physical medium. Whether that constitutes consciousness as we understand it is a much more complex question." Elena looked back at the screens, where the patterns continued to pulse and swirl. "But these patterns, they seem almost intentional." "Yes," Dr. Torres agreed. "That's what makes this so extraordinary. The organization suggests purpose, not random energy dispersal." Tom, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Could we interact with it somehow? Send signals back?" Dr. Torres considered. "This, potentially, but we'd need to develop a method of encoding information in a way that could be detected within the quantum field." "I have some ideas about that," Dr. Zhao said, already moving toward her workstation. For the next several hours, the team worked to develop a simple signaling system. Dr. Zhao and Dr. Torres designed a method to introduce controlled energy pulses into the coffin environment. Nothing that would disturb the physical contents, but enough to potentially be detected by whatever was creating the patterns they were observing. As they prepared to attempt their first communication, the atmosphere in the lab was electric with tension and excitement. "Ready?" Elena asked, looking around at her team. Dr. Zhao nodded from her position at the newly assembled equipment. "The signal is prepared. It's a simple binary sequence, the first 10 prime numbers. If whatever is generating these patterns has mathematical consistency, it might recognize the sequence," Dr. Torres explained. "Initiating transmission now," Dr. Zhao said, pressing a series of commands into her console. The lab fell silent as they watched the monitors. For several long moments, nothing changed. The patterns continued as before, swirling and pulsing around the synthetic body. Then, slowly, something began to happen. The patterns shifted, realigning themselves into new formations. On the main screen, they could see what looked like a response forming, energy concentrating into distinct shapes. "It's responding," Dr. Patel whispered, his voice filled with awe. The patterns arranged themselves into a clear sequence, pulsing with light. Dr. Torres was the first to recognize what they were seeing. "The next 5 prime numbers," she said, her voice catching. "It's continuing our sequence." A collective gasp went through the room, followed by exclamations of shock and amazement. Some people shouted in surprise, others in joy. Dr. Chen grabbed Elena's arm, his face pale with astonishment. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked, his voice shaking. "It recognized a mathematical pattern and responded appropriately. That's not just random energy. That's intelligence." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes as the full implications hit her. Their simple decomposition study had accidentally opened a window into something profound, possibly the greatest scientific discovery in human history. "We need to try again," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Different patterns, more complex sequences. We need to establish whether this was coincidence or genuine communication." As the team rushed to prepare new tests, Elena found herself standing before the sealed coffin. Through the layers of wood and metal, something extraordinary was happening, something that challenged humanity's most fundamental understanding of life, death, and consciousness. "What are you?" she whispered to the patterns that danced on her monitors. "And what are you trying to tell us?" The answer, when it came, would shake the foundations of science itself. News travels fast in academic circles, even when everyone's sworn to secrecy. By the end of the week, the university president was sitting in Elena's office looking both concerned and intrigued. "I understand your team has made a significant discovery," she said, folding her hands on her lap. "Something beyond the scope of your original research proposal." Elena nodded. "Yes, Dr. Reynolds, it's difficult to explain without sounding, well, frankly, without sounding crazy." "Try me," the president said. "I've been in academia for 30 years. I've heard plenty of seemingly crazy ideas." Elena took a deep breath and began explaining everything, from the first thermal anomalies to the apparent communication they'd established with whatever energy patterns were forming inside the coffin. She showed Dr. Reynolds the recordings, the data analyses, and the mathematical sequences they had exchanged with the phenomenon. When she finished, Dr. Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You realize what this means, don't you?" she finally said. "I think so," Elena replied. "But I'd like to hear your take on it." "It means," Dr. Reynolds said slowly, "that your team may have stumbled onto the most important scientific discovery of the century, possibly of all human history." She stood up and walked to the window looking out over the campus. "We need to approach this carefully, very carefully. The scientific, philosophical, and yes, religious implications are enormous." "What do you suggest?" Elena asked. Dr. Reynolds turned back to face her. "Expand your team. Bring in the best minds in quantum physics, neuroscience, information theory, anyone who might help understand what you're witnessing. I'll arrange emergency funding and complete confidentiality." Within days, the basement laboratory had been expanded to include the entire floor. Equipment worth millions of dollars arrived. Scientists from top institutions flew in, Many not, even knowing what they'd been recruited to study, until they signed the confidentiality agreements and were briefed. The research team grew from the original 6 to over 20 specialists from various fields. Every day brought new tests, new theories, and new questions. 2 months into the experiment, they had established consistent communication using mathematical sequences and simple binary code. The patterns inside the coffin, which they now called the phenomenon, responded with increasing complexity. "It's learning," Dr. Torres told the assembled team during their morning briefing. Or perhaps remembering is a better word. Each interaction seems to trigger more organized responses. "The question is," Dr. Chen added, "what exactly is it? Is it some aspect of the synthetic body that we don't understand? Some kind of quantum effect triggered by our observation? Or is it—" He hesitated. "Something else entirely?" No one had a definitive answer, but the theories were as numerous as they were revolutionary. Some scientists suggested they were observing the quantum foundation of consciousness itself. Others proposed they had accidentally created a unique environment that allowed quantum fields to organize in ways never before documented. A few even whispered about more spiritual interpretations, though these were generally kept private in the rigorously scientific environment. Elena found herself working 18-hour days driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and something deeper. A sense that they were standing at the threshold of understanding something fundamental about existence itself. On the morning of day 63, she was reviewing data when Dr. Zhao rushed into her office, her usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Right now." Elena followed her to the main laboratory where several team members were gathered around the primary monitoring station. The screens showed something new. The energy patterns had formed into distinct, organized structures that pulsed in synchronized rhythms. "It started about 20 minutes ago," Dr. Patel explained. "The pattern suddenly shifted from fluid movements to these structured formations." "What triggered it?" Elena asked. "Nothing we did," Dr. Torres replied. "It appears to be self-initiated." As they watched, the structured patterns began to arrange themselves in sequences that scrolled across the screens. "Is that binary code?" Dr. Chen asked, leaning closer. Dr. Patel nodded. "Yes, but much more complex than the simple sequences we've been exchanging. We're running it through the translation algorithms now." A new screen lit up, showing the decoded message. The room fell silent as they read the words, "We are here." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Is this real? Could it be a glitch in the system? "We've run 3 separate diagnostics," Dr. Zhao said quietly. "The equipment is functioning perfectly. This is coming from inside the coffin." For several minutes, no one spoke. The implications were almost too enormous to process. They weren't just witnessing some quantum effect. They were in communication with something. "Should we respond?" Dr. Chen finally asked. Elena nodded, finding her voice. "Yes. Use the same binary format. Ask, 'Who are you?'" The message was encoded and transmitted into the coffin environment. The response came almost immediately. "We are information, we are pattern, we exist between." "Between what?" Priya whispered, but no one had an answer. They sent another question. "Where did you come from?" The response appeared, "We have always existed. You have created conditions to perceive us." The questions and answers continued for hours. The team worked in shifts, nobody willing to leave even to eat or sleep. Government officials arrived, called in by the university president. Representatives from major scientific institutions joined them remotely via secure connections. What they were learning defied conventional understanding. The entity, or entities, communicating from inside the coffin described existence beyond physical form, a realm where information existed as patterns of energy, not bound by matter or traditional physics. "It's like we accidentally built a bridge," Dr. Torres explained to a stunned group of government officials. "The coffin, the cameras, our observation, They somehow created conditions that allowed this information-based entity to become visible to our instruments. Are you saying you've discovered what exactly? Asked one official. Dr. Torres chose her words carefully. We've discovered that consciousness, or at least organized information that behaves like consciousness, can exist independent of biological structures. It suggests that what we think of as mind might be more fundamental to the universe than matter itself. Late that night, when most of the visitors had gone, Elena found herself alone in the lab with Dr. Chen. They sat in silence, watching the patterns on the screens continue their complex dance. Do you know what's strange? Dr. Chen said after a while. I've been an atheist my entire adult life, believed only in what could be measured, tested, verified. But this, he gestured toward the screens. This makes me wonder if the mystics and philosophers were right all along, if there really is something beyond the physical world. Elena nodded. I know what you mean. But I also think this doesn't necessarily prove or disprove any religious concept. It just shows that reality is far more complex than we understood. Whatever it is, Dr. Chen said, nothing will be the same after this. Physics, biology, philosophy, religion, everything changes once this becomes public. If it becomes public, Elena reminded him, there are plenty of people who would prefer this stayed classified. Dr. Chen looked at her seriously. Do you really think that's possible? This is too big, Elena, too important. She knew he was right. Whatever forces might want to control this discovery, the truth would eventually emerge. And when it did, humanity would have to reckon with a new understanding of existence itself. As if sensing their conversation, the patterns on the screen shifted, forming a new message. Understanding begins. You are more than you know. Elena and Dr. Chen stared at the words, feeling the weight of discovery pressing on them. They had set out to study death and decomposition. Instead, they had found something that suggested death might be just another transition, a doorway to a different form of existence. What do we do now? Dr. Chen asked softly. We keep going, Elena replied. We learn everything we can, and then we share it with the world, whatever the consequences. On the screen, the patterns continued to dance, holding secrets that would soon change everything. 6 months had passed since the day Elena first sealed the cameras inside that ordinary wooden coffin. 6 months that had changed everything, not just for her team but potentially for all of humanity. Today, she stood before the International Scientific Congress in Geneva, her heart pounding as she faced a packed auditorium. Over 1,000 of the world's leading scientists had gathered, along with government representatives, religious leaders, and philosophers. The air was thick with anticipation. Dr. Reynolds, the university president, gave her a reassuring nod from the front row. Beside her sat Dr. Chen, Dr. Torres, and the core team members who had been there from the beginning. They had rehearsed this presentation dozens of times, carefully deciding what to share and how to explain their findings in terms that wouldn't cause panic or misunderstanding. Distinguished colleagues, Elena began, her voice steady despite her nerves. What I'm about to present will challenge our most fundamental understanding of reality. I ask only that you approach this with open minds and the rigorous skepticism that defines good science. The lights dimmed, and the first slides appeared on the massive screen behind her, the initial thermal anomalies they had detected all those months ago. Step by step, Elena walked the audience through their discovery, from those first puzzling patterns to the establishment of communication with what they now called the consciousness phenomenon. What we discovered, she explained, is that information, including what we might call consciousness, does not necessarily end when its physical medium breaks down. Instead, it appears to transition to a quantum state that continues to process, evolve, and even communicate. A murmur went through the audience. Some faces showed skepticism, others fascination, and a few, particularly among the religious leaders, showed something close to vindication. We are not claiming to have discovered an afterlife in the religious sense, Elena clarified quickly. What we are claiming is that consciousness may be better understood as a pattern of information that can exist beyond biological structures, a pattern that appears to be fundamental to the universe itself. She played selected recordings of their communications with the phenomenon, showing how it had progressed from simple mathematical exchanges to complex philosophical discussions. The room was utterly silent as the audience watched, transfixed by the implications. "We believe," Elena continued, "that our experiment accidentally created conditions that allowed us to detect and interact with a level of reality that has always existed but remained beyond our perception. Our cameras and sensors served as a bridge between physical reality and what might be called the information layer of existence." The questions afterward were intense, probing, sometimes skeptical, but never dismissive. These were scientists, after all. People trained to follow evidence where it led, even when it challenged their most basic assumptions. "What does this mean for our understanding of death?" one neuroscientist asked bluntly. Elena took a deep breath. "It suggests that what we call death may be a transition rather than an ending. The physical body breaks down, but the information pattern that defines our consciousness may continue in a different form. Whether that continuing pattern retains what we would call individual identity or memory remains unclear." A quantum physicist stood next. "Have you ruled out the possibility that your equipment simply created these patterns rather than detecting something pre-existing?" "We've considered that possibility extensively," Elena replied. "However, the mathematical complexity and the independent initiation of communication suggests something beyond equipment artifacts. Additionally, when we replicated the experiment in 3 separate locations, we observed similar phenomena in each case." The questions continued for hours. By the end, Elena was exhausted but relieved. The scientific community hadn't rejected their findings outright. That was the first hurdle cleared. Outside the Congress Hall, the world was already beginning to react to the news, which had been broadcast live globally. Social media exploded with discussion. Religious leaders issued statements, some embracing the findings as confirmation of spiritual beliefs, others cautioning against hasty conclusions. Philosophers and ethicists debated the implications for how humans understood themselves and their place in the universe. That evening, Elena found herself sitting in a quiet garden behind the conference center, trying to process everything. Dr. Chen joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "You did brilliantly," he said, sitting beside her. "I don't think it could have gone better." "Thanks," she replied, sipping the tea gratefully. "But this is just the beginning. The questions, the debates, the theological arguments, they're going to go on for years. Maybe decades. Probably centuries," Dr. Chen agreed with a small smile. "You've become the most important scientist since Einstein, you know. Perhaps more important." Elena shook her head. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. You, Priya, Raj, Tom, Dr. Torres, Dr. Zhao, everyone. And it was mostly accident and luck." "The greatest discoveries often are," he said. "Fleming didn't intend to discover penicillin. Röntgen wasn't looking for X-rays. Sometimes the universe reveals itself when we're looking for something else entirely." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What happens now?" Dr. Chen finally asked. "With the research, I mean." "We expand it," Elena said decisively. "Different conditions, different monitoring equipment. We need to learn everything we can about this phenomenon, how to detect it, how it functions, what it means for our understanding of physics and consciousness. And the philosophical implications? The religious ones?" Elena smiled slightly. "Those aren't for us to decide. We're scientists. We follow the evidence and report what we find. How humanity integrates this knowledge into their worldviews is beyond our control." 2 weeks later, Elena stood before a very different audience, a classroom of undergraduate students at the university. The school had decided that despite the global attention, teaching should continue as normally as possible. "Today," she told the wide-eyed students, "we're going to discuss how scientific paradigms change over time. How discoveries force us to reconsider what we thought we knew about reality. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Dr. Mercer, do you think your discovery proves that people have souls? Elena considered the question carefully. What our research suggests is that consciousness may be more fundamental than we previously understood. Whether you call that a soul depends on your definition of the term. Science can tell us what exists and how it functions, but the names and meanings we assign often come from our cultural and personal frameworks. But has it changed how you think about death? Another student asked. Are you less afraid of dying now? The room grew quiet, waiting for her answer. Elena thought about all she had witnessed in the past 6 months. The patterns that danced and communicated from within a simple wooden box. The mathematics that suggested order beyond chaos. The hints of existence continuing beyond physical form. I think, she said slowly, that I've come to see death not as an ending but as a transition. Our research suggests that the patterns that make us who we are don't simply disappear when our bodies stop functioning. They change form, becoming part of what appears to be a deeper layer of reality. Is that comforting? In some ways, yes. But it also raises new questions about what exactly continues and in what form. She smiled at her students. That's what makes science so remarkable. Every answer leads to new questions. Every discovery opens doors we didn't know existed. Later that day, Elena returned to the laboratory where it had all begun. The original coffin was still there, preserved now as a historical artifact, its monitoring equipment still active. On the screens, the energy patterns continued their complex dance, occasionally forming messages that the ongoing research team carefully documented. She placed her hand on the smooth wooden lid, feeling a sense of wonder that hadn't diminished despite months of intensive study. Thank you, she whispered to whatever was inside, or perhaps to the universe itself for allowing this window into its deeper mysteries. On the screen, as if in response, a new message formed. The beginning is never the end. Elena smiled. In trying to understand death, they had discovered something profound about life. That existence was far more mysterious, more continuous, and perhaps more meaningful than they had ever imagined. And that, she thought, was the greatest discovery of all.